Hey guys, this is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with our Benny's Bat section for today, Saturday, July 18th. Actually heading out to the Yankee game in a few minutes, so I wanted to make sure I got this in nice and early for you guys and, up on the site before I had to go. I probably won't be around much before the early lineup lock. I should be back in time for tonight, though, so I'll be over on the forums if you have any questions about any of this stuff. Feel free to leave a message in the forums for me, and I'll get back to you when I get back from the game. First guy I wanted to talk about, as you guys know, in our bat section, what we like to do is we like to go through the pitching options on the day, figure out where the pitcher's weaknesses are, and then try to highlight the bats who have the best chance to do well against them. The first guy I want to talk about today is Chad Billingsley. Billingsley has been bad basically to both sides of the plate. Left-handed hitters are hitting .429 against him with 4 home runs and 11 innings pitched so far and a whip of 2.66. He's also been bad to right-handed batters who have hit .301 against him so far. So this is definitely somebody that you might want to consider stacking against. The problem is the offense that's going up against him is not all that great. There are a couple guys on the Marlins that do stand out, though. The first one of them is Justin Bour. He has a .381 WOBA and a .253 ISO number. Most of his 10 home runs have come against right-handed pitching, and he's in a good hitter's ballpark. He gets a nice park bump, as does the rest of his team as well, switching from the Marlins Park over to Citizens Bank Park in Philly. Justin Bour is very cheap. I think he's only about $3,000 over on DraftKings. He's definitely somebody who I think can provide some cheap power for you if you do decide to spend down at first base today. Next guy I want to talk about is Derek Dietrich. I'm hoping Dietrich is in the lineup today. With Martin Prado back, it's been kind of tough for him to find, basically to find at bats. He either plays second base or third base. And the problem is that D. Gordon is the second baseman. And now with Prado back playing third base, there really isn't a spot, for Dietrich to play in the infield. He does have a .378 WOBA and a .204 ISO, though, against right-handed pitching. So he's somebody that if he gets in there, I think could make for a good salary saver today. The last guy I want to talk about is D. Gordon. D. Gordon's numbers don't pop off the page against you, but he is hitting pretty well against right-handed pitching. I think he has about a .330 batting average so far this year against right-handed pitching, and 24 of his 33 stolen bases have come against right-handers. So Philly is a team that you can run on. So if Gordon gets on base, he should be in a good spot to do some running, and is definitely a candidate for the single or for the walk, the stolen base, and the run scored, which will be pretty nice and almost return value for him just in that one at bat. Next team I want to talk about is Arizona going up against San Francisco. Jake Peavy's on the mound for San Francisco. Peavy has hasn't been horrible this year, but he also hasn't been all that good. He's definitely not the same guy he was a couple years ago. Left-handed bats have actually been hitting him, for a higher home run rate and a higher whip, which basically leaves one guy on Arizona that really stands out for me. Before I get to him, though, the guy that you can use, whether it's right-handed or left-handed pitching for Arizona, is Paul Goldschmidt. Even against right-handers, he has a .435 WOBA and a .261 ISO number. So that's absolutely phenomenal numbers that he has, whether he's going up against the same-handed pitcher or not. The one guy from the other side of the plate who profiles the best against Peavy is actually David Peralta. Peralta has been hitting second in that order. He has a .359 WOBA and a .219 ISO. So he's somebody that has some power upside and also should be able to pick up a couple hits. If he's hitting in that 2-hole, he's very likely to be on base. He's also likely to be driven in by some of the big bats behind him. So I think that Peralta is another guy that you might want to consider today from that Arizona team. Next guy I want to talk about is Scott Feldman. Scott Feldman is versus Texas today. He's a pitcher for Houston. Both sides have been doing pretty well against him. So whether you take the left-handed batters or the right-handed batters, they've both been doing pretty decently against Feldman this year. The two guys that really stand out to me, though, as smashing right-handed pitching for that Texas team are Prince Fielder, who has a .425 WOBA and a .179 ISO number against right-handed pitching, and Mitch Moreland. Mitch Moreland has a .403 WOBA, so a little bit less than Fielder, but his ISO number of .304 means that this guy's got a ton of power against right-handed pitching. He's probably the guy who has more upside. He's a little bit cheaper than Fielder is, and he's probably the better tournament play. Fielder has a little bit of a higher WOBA and is a little bit more consistent, so he's probably the guy that you would want to use in cash. If you're playing on a site, I know on FanDuel, Moreland's listed as an outfielder and Fielder's listed as a first baseman. It's not a bad idea to try to get both of these guys into your rosters. If you're playing on DraftKings, though, I think they're both only listed at first base, so you really have to choose which one of the two that you want to put into your roster today. I think both guys are in pretty good spots. I also think that Adrian Beltre could be in line for a pretty good game today. So if you're looking for teams to stack, putting those three guys together if you can, like I said, probably not on DraftKings, but on some of the other sites like an Aces or a FanDuel, you'd be able to do it. I think that would give you a lot of upside today. Next guy I want to talk about is Chris Tillman. Chris Tillman pitches for Baltimore. He's been giving up a lot of home runs. Over the course of the last 3 years, he's given up, I think, over 50 of them. This year alone, right-handed batters are hitting .314 with 8 home runs and 40 innings pitched against him. So there's two guys who I think you should really be targeting on this team right now. The first one is J.D. Martinez. J.D. Martinez has been awesome lately. Had another home run last night, now has hits in 10 of his last 11 games. His WOBA is 395, and his ISO score is 291. So this is a guy who's in line for multiple hits today and also has the power to go to take Tillman out of the park. Like I said, Tillman's a guy who's been giving up a lot of home runs over the course of the last 3 seasons. So I definitely think J.D. Martinez is one of those guys who makes a lot of sense to use today. The other guy on his team who I think you can use is Yoenis Cespedes. He has a 378 WOBA number and a 210 ISO number. He has double-digit DraftKings points in 6 of his last 9 games. So this is another guy that's been pretty hot and has helped carry that Detroit offense with Miguel Cabrera out. Next guy I want to talk about is Manny Banuelos. Now, he's only going to go about 5 or 6 innings today. They have him on an innings limit this season. It's only his second season back from the Tommy John surgery. He's a young pitcher. They're trying to bring him along slow. So I don't expect him to be in there for a long time. But he will pitch probably about 2 rounds through the order, depending on how he does. If he gets lit up, maybe they get a 3rd round through, but I really doubt that he makes it into the 6th inning today. There is a couple guys who profile well against him, but you have to remember that half this game is going to be played against their bullpen. But for starters, while he gets up, he's probably going to see everybody in that lineup at least twice, and that's good news for a guy like Chris Bryant. Bryant has a 393 WOBA, a 304 ISO number, so he's got a ton of power. He's been hitting left-handed pitching very, very well this year. He has 4 home runs so far and 56 at-bats against a left-hander. So he's basically hitting one about every 14 at-bats. So this is definitely a good spot for Bryant. He has a 917 on-base plus slugging percentage so far. So Bryant is somebody who you definitely want to try to fit in your lineup. The problem that you're going to have is he's very expensive today. Over on DraftKings, I think he's almost $5,000. With Miguel Cabrera being hurt, I think he's actually the most expensive third baseman that you can have over on DraftKings today. But again, like I said, he's in a very good spot, and he's definitely somebody that you want to keep an eye on. I actually forgot to mention him when I was doing my research, but Jorge Soler is back as well. He should be hitting 5th or 6th in that order for the Cubbies, and I think he might be another guy who's in line for a good game today. Next guy I want to talk about is Rick Porcello. Porcello's going up against the Los Angeles Angels. He has a bad batting average to both lefty and right-handed batters this year, but left-handed batters are hitting him slightly better. When you look at that Angels team, though, there aren't really any lefties that completely stand out at you. The only guy they really have is Cole Calhoun, and he's not somebody who I think I love today. But there are 2 right-handed bats that smash right-handed pitching on that team, and that's Mike Trout and Albert Pujols. Trout has a 416 WOBA with a 283 ISO number, so he's been hitting them well and hitting them with power. He's a guy that's in line for a couple hits today, and the thing that we love about Mike Trout is he can fill up a stat sheet. He can get you a home run. He can steal a couple bases for you. He can drive in a couple runs. He can score a couple runs. He has a high on-base percentage. I mean, he's the best player in baseball, arguably. And, you know, like I said, he's a guy that you should be using in fantasy whenever he's in a good matchup. And I think today is a good matchup for him. The other guy you could look at is Albert Pujols. Pujols has a 387 WOBA with a 286 ISO number, and he's already flashed a ton of power. He has over 20 home runs this year against right-handed pitching, and he looks like a new man. After a slow start to the season, he's really picked it up. He's been absolutely smashing the ball lately. He's got good lineup placement. He hits right behind Trout in that lineup, so he gets up a lot of times with men on base to drive in. And I think that the Trout and Pujols combination is definitely something you want to look at today, because they should be able to do some damage against Porcello. Next guy I want to talk about is Chase Anderson. He's a guy that I think you can target against today. He's given up 9 home runs in his last 22 innings pitched over his last 4 games. So he's really been struggling after having a pretty decent start to the season. Right-handed batters are doing far better against him in the home run category, the RBI category, and the hits category. So he's definitely somebody who I think we can target. In cash games, I think you can look at a guy like Buster Posey. He's got a 393 WOBA. Doesn't have a ton of power upside. He only has a 191 ISO, and he hasn't really been hitting a ton of home runs this year. He does have some home run power. We have seen it in the past, but I definitely think that he's a good guy you could look at for your cash games. Now, you also have to be wary of his price, though. Over on DraftKings, I think he's like 4,700 or 4,800, which is insanely expensive considering that the next best option below him, you can get a guy like a Stephen Vogt, who we'll talk about in a minute, for like 3,600. So you're saving basically almost 25% by coming down from a guy like Posey to a guy like Vogt. And I don't know if Posey's really worth paying up for. The good part about that is if you are playing in a tournament and you do want to pay up for Posey, you're likely to be one of the few, and I'm not going to say the few, but I think he'll be lower owned than you would expect him to be, given that he does have one of the best matchups on the day. You could also look at a guy like Matt Duffy. Matt Duffy's numbers have been really, really good lately. He has a 369 WOBA and a 181 ISO number. And lately, he's actually been hitting in the 3-hole for that San Francisco Giants team. So if he's going to be the guy, hitting in the 3-hole in front of Posey, I definitely think he's somebody that you want to look at and consider today. His price is not too prohibitive. I know on DraftKings, he's below 4,000. I think he might even be below 3,000 over on FanDuel. And on Aces, he's only about 46, I think. So he's definitely somebody that fits nicely into your rosters and somebody that you should look at today. If he's still hitting in the 3-hole, I definitely think he's going to give you good value. Let's see. We got Colby Lewis next. Colby Lewis is going up against Houston. Now, this is a little bit of a tough matchup for the hitters because Colby Lewis struggles the most against left-handed bats. The problem that we've had with Houston all season long is they don't have any left-handed bats. You can look at a guy, like a Jason Castro at catcher if you want to as a cheap catching option, but I don't think you really want to go that route today. Like I said, you can get a Vogt for only like 3,600 on DraftKings. The one guy who does stick out and is a little bit interesting to me on this Houston team is Preston Tucker. The rookie's been pretty good against right-handed pitching. He's one of the few left-handed bats that they have. He's got a 360 WOBA on a year with a 216 ISO number. So he's got a little bit of power, and he hits the ball pretty well. 360 is kind of like the threshold we look for with WOBA. If a guy's got at least a 360 WOBA or above, he's somebody that we try to consider. But we really do like to see the guys who have those WOBAs closer to 400. That puts them in a great matchup. So Tucker could be a price-saving option for you if you wanted to. I think he's only about $3,000. And if he gets to start today, he could be somebody that's in play. I'm hoping that they put him back in the 2-hole. Yesterday, they had Marwin Gonzalez there. But I'm hoping against the righty, you see Tucker in the 2-hole so that he's hitting behind Altuve and in front of Correa. I think that would be the best spot for him and gives him the best chance for some upside. Next guy I want to talk about is Anthony DeSclafani. He actually hasn't been horrible so far this year. There are really only 2 bats on Cleveland that I'm kind of looking at to take against him. Against right-handed pitching, Jason Kipnis is always in play, has a 424 WOBA against right-handers. I think he's batting about 380 against them this year. So he's definitely somebody that you want to look at, although, again, doesn't have a ton of upside, and his price is pretty expensive. If I'm going to pay up for somebody, I usually want to know that they have some home run upside. With Kipnis, you're basically hoping that he has a nice multi-hit game, scores a couple runs, and maybe picks up an RBI or 2. It's a lot easier when you're just waiting for a guy on one swing to hit a home run and pay off his salary. With the high salary that Kipnis has, I really don't know if he's a guy that I love at second base today. But he is a good, solid option. He's somebody that if you're playing in cash games, makes a lot of sense for you to use. The next guy I wanted to talk about, though, is Carlos Santana. He's 56 points over the course of his last 4 games. He's 6 of his last 13. He's been averaging about 14 points per game. He hits pretty well against right-handed pitching, so I think that this is definitely another guy that you can look at today. He's first base and third base eligible on DraftKings. He's catcher and first base eligible on some other sites. So if you can fit him into your roster, he's going to give you a little bit of a price savings if you're coming down at catcher on spots from guys like a Posey. At first base, though, I don't know if I love him as much. I do not mind him at third base today. I think he's somebody that you can put in there if you don't feel like paying up for the price tag for Chris Bryant, who's probably going to be the most popular third base option today. Next guy I want to talk about is Phil Hughes. Phil Hughes is somebody who I do think we can target bats against. That Oakland offense has not been playing very well lately, and it's reflected in their prices. If you look on DraftKings, these guys are all dirt cheap. Like I said, Vogt's 3,600. His teammate Josh Reddick is down to 3,300. So these are guys that at the beginning of the season were just absolutely on fire and smashing the ball, and now they seem to be struggling. I mean, I don't even think they scored last night. I'm pretty sure they got shut out, and that wasn't the greatest matchup that they had. It wasn't the greatest matchup for the pitcher last night. They should have been able to do some damage, and they really didn't get anything done. Excuse me. Hughes has allowed left-handed batters to hit 277 against them and right-handed batters to hit 297 against them. And he's given up 22 home runs already in 116 innings worth of work. So he's given up a home run about one every 5 innings. The two guys who profile the best against him are Stephen Vogt. As we said, Vogt is a guy who has a 399 WOBA and a 253 ISO number. Reddick is the other guy with a 388 WOBA and a 199 ISO number. So Vogt is definitely my favorite option. He has the most upside for the home run today. Reddick is probably the other guy that you could look at, although he hasn't really been hitting all that well. So I think I would rather stick with Vogt. But again, Hughes is a guy that's a fly ball pitcher, gives up a lot of fly balls. Fly balls turn into home runs. So there's definitely a couple guys you can look at here. Maybe even a guy like an Ike Davis. Like we said, he's been bad to both sides of the plate. So a guy like Billy Butler might even be in play. There's a lot of ways you can go with it. So just, keep an eye on it. I think Hughes is somebody who you might be able to stack some bats against, although it's not the greatest hitter's ballpark, and Oakland hasn't been all that great lately. Next guy I want to talk about is Jimmy Nelson. Nelson's going up against Pittsburgh today. He's really struggled with left-handed bats. They're hitting 304 against him with 7 home runs in 42 innings worth of work. The one guy who kind of stands out a little bit to me here is Neil Walker. Walker is the second base option, usually hits up towards the top of the order whenever they go up against right-handed pitching. Has 7 home runs already on the year, so he has a little bit of pop for a second baseman. Again, I don't think he's got great numbers. He's not somebody who pops off the page, but Nelson is a guy who basically strikes you out or gives up a home run to you, and especially if you're a left-handed bat. So I think Walker is probably the best way to go and attack that. Next guy I want to talk about, Bartolo Colon. Now, Colon has been pretty solid, but he does have a problem with giving up home runs. He basically only throws fastballs, and he doesn't throw them at a rate that batters can't catch up to him. So he really relies on location. If he misses his location, there's going to be some upside there. One guy who makes a lot of sense for me to use against him is Randall Grichuk. He's got a little bit of power, 362 WOBA, but a 276 ISO number. So if Colon does miss one of those pitches over to Grichuk, I think that he could be a guy who takes him yard. His price is pretty cheap. I think he's only like $3,500 over on DraftKings today. So he could be a good salary saver with some upside, and also somebody who goes off low owned every time. So he could give you that differentiation that you're looking for in your tournament rosters. Last guy I kind of want to talk about is Scott Kazmir. The Twins do pretty well against left-handed pitching. So even though Kazmir is a pretty good pitcher, he's definitely not somebody that I have on my radar today. And I wouldn't be too scared to take a couple bats against them. Not a lot of bats, but there are a couple guys that stand out. I really like Trevor Plouffe. He hit that grand slam home run yesterday. Hits in the middle of that order for the Twins. Right-handed bat who hits left-handed pitching pretty well. Again, I'm looking for third base options that get me off of Chris Bryant, because as good as Bryant is, he's very expensive today, and I think he's going to be highly owned. So for your cash games, I definitely think you want to look at a guy like Bryant. But for your tournaments, I think there could be some value in going with a guy like Santana or a guy like Plouffe, who we're talking about here. The one guy who actually profiles the best upside for tournaments is Brian Dozier. Dozier's a 362 WOBA with a 240 ISO number. And again, he strikes out a lot. He makes out a lot. He's not your typical leadoff hitter up on top of the order, but he led off the game with a home run yesterday. He actually hits more of his home runs against left-handed pitching, so he's in arguably a better spot today. And you're not going to find a lot of guys at the second base position that have tremendous power. I think he might be the only second baseman so far this year with double-digit home runs. And again, when you talk about Brian Dozier, the thing you want to target him in is target him when he goes up against left-handed pitching. So even though Kazmir's not a gas can, he's somebody who's a pretty solid left-handed pitcher, I still think Dozier's in a pretty good spot today. So that wraps it all up today for the Benny's Bats section. Remember, we only went over the late games on the late slate tonight. I'm heading out to the Yankee game in a few minutes, so I won't be on chat or around the forum much today. I'll try to get back before lineups lock, and while I'm scrambling to put my lineups together, I'll try to answer any of the questions that you guys have. So feel free to leave your questions in the forum. I'll get back to them as soon as I get back from the game today. And as always, stay classy, DFS.